Gladys, welcome to Chapter Connect.
Hello, everybody. I'm excited to host the first Explorers Club Africa Chapter Connect. I know since the pandemic began, there's always been a request from Anne to hold this, so we're really excited to hold it. We'd really like to thank Tim, Anne, and Luis for organizing all of this. And here we are coming right from Africa, ready to share with you what we're doing and how we are coping during the pandemic. I'm going to start off by speaking briefly about the chapter, and I'm going to share my screen. The Explorers Club Africa chapter is quite a young chapter, and we're just excited to share with you what we're doing from where we are right now. The chapter began a few years ago. This photograph was taken in actually 2014, before the chapter had begun. And the president at the time, Alan Nichols, came with his wife, Betty, to Uganda. And we took them gorilla tracking. It was really exciting. And then organized a dinner for them in Uganda. But even going a bit further, the person who introduced me to them was Julian Monroe Fisher. He had just come to Uganda to follow the Baker, Sir Samuel Baker trail, who discovered Murchison Falls, and he was together with his great-great-granddaughter of Sir Samuel Baker, and it was really nice to just be with them during all that time and learning more. I was completely fascinated by Julian Monroe Fisher because he had come up from Sudan and he had so many stories. And then he tried to convince me to join the Explorers Club and recommended me to become a member together with a few other people. So then Alan Nichols came with his wife. It was really nice to take them gorilla tracking in Uganda. And over here are some members from Uganda. So the Explorers Club has about 22 members at the moment, very varied from, stretching from South Africa, Kenya, Namibia, Mozambique, Egypt, Tanzania, Uganda, Morocco. It's quite a big range of places we're from, but we also have Fania Rose, who's the former president of Explorers Club from South Africa, and she's from South Africa, so it's great that she's joined us. And yeah, it's nice to have this whole range of people in the Explorers Club, and we're hoping that it will keep growing. So in April 2017, it finally happened. Our application was approved, and I really want to thank Sinov because she really did a lot to make this happen. She really mentored me, and she really did a lot to make it happen. So I was happy to attend the ECAD in 2018 and get to meet her and really see how everything works at the Explorers Club. So before I hand over to some of the members who are here today, which really includes Laurie Marker, Vance Martin, Lady Lichtenfield, Praveen Morman, possibly Ian Clark may join us. Before I hand over to them to speak, I'm going to talk about the work that I'm doing in my exploration. I've been working with gorillas for 25 years, actually since I was a vet student, and I'm just going to talk briefly about what we've been doing to mitigate the impact of COVID-19 on gorilla conservation. The threats to gorillas all over Africa are the same, but the threats change according to the level of habituation of the gorillas and the level of poverty and development in the area and services which are available to the community. So habitat loss is a threat everywhere because there's high human population growth everywhere. And when you come to a place like Bwindi Penetrable National Park, where half the mountain gorillas are found, just under half, you find a very hard edge over here. And there's only about 1,000 mountain gorillas left in the world, but luckily the numbers continue to grow. But the only gorilla subspecies which is growing is the mountain gorilla species. Poaching is a problem everywhere as well, but particularly in Uganda and Rwanda, where people don't eat primates typically. Like the Batwa pygmies, it has always been a taboo for them to look in the eye of a gorilla, and that's probably the reason why they never hunted the gorillas at all. But people hunt other animals like dyke and bush pig, and gorillas end up getting snared or speared, which has happened during the pandemic. But however, in other parts of Africa where gorillas are found, they're eaten, it's a delicacy. People think that if you eat a gorilla, you become as strong as a gorilla. So there's some cultural beliefs that have resulted in that. But disease is another big one that we've been addressing, and that's why we set up conservation through public health. When I worked as the first veterinarian for the Uganda Wildlife Authority, the first disease I had to handle was a scabies skin disease in the mountain gorillas. And this is a baby gorilla that died of scabies. And it was eventually traced to people living around the park who have very little health care. And when gorillas go to people's gardens to eat their banana plants, they find dirty clothing on scarecrows, which they put out for gorillas, baboons, and other wildlife. And we believe that that's how they got the scabies. So we had to treat all of them, and they got better, but unfortunately the baby gorilla died. And that made us think that we needed to start supporting the communities around the park to improve their health. And because if we couldn't improve their health, the gorillas wouldn't really be protected. So we have a wildlife conservation program, community health, strengthening community-based healthcare, and alternative livelihoods, where we also started a gorilla conservation coffee social enterprise. Leili, would you like to give your talk?
Thank you very much, Gladys. It's wonderful to be calling in today from beautiful Tanzania, where I've had the fortune to ride out the pandemic here and take some resilience from the incredible wildlife and the incredible resilience of the people of Tanzania who are encountering also this pandemic. And of course, as Gladys also mentioned, this incredible reduction in tourism, almost to zero, in a country that is very, very dependent on tourism. So it's been incredible to see how resilient people can be at this time. And I'm calling in actually from our field-based headquarters. So this is kind of a view of where I am at the moment. And I thought that it would be nice as we hopefully round the corner now with the pandemic and some hopeful vaccines coming out, to share some uplifting stories with all of you and also how we've fared over the last year. And this little cub is named Indito, which is Maasai for little girl. And we met Indito several months ago. She's part of a recovering lion population in the Tarangire ecosystem that the African People and Wildlife Team has largely been a huge part of the recovery of this lion population. And she's precocious, and she's always the first cub to come out to the cars or to chase her siblings. Here she is with her mother. And for me, I think she's just become a real symbol of hope. I've kind of become focused on her quite a bit during this time because it's a bright light at the moment. And it's also a symbol of what works. About 10 years ago, the roar of the lion was disappearing from this landscape, and today it's coming back, and we have prides. Indito has 5 other cubs that she was born into the pride with 2 mamas. And the reason for this is because we're really working on finding the balance at African People and Wildlife, looking for those win-win solutions where both communities and nature thrive. And when it comes to human-wildlife conflict and lions, the Warriors for Wildlife, these are local community members working across northern Tanzania. There are more than 50 of them working in their own communities, monitoring conflict, trying to prevent lions and hyenas and leopards from taking people's livestock, their cattle, their goats, and their sheep at night, working with them to monitor where the big cats are, monitoring the conflict, and developing innovative solutions for preventing conflict, both at pasture and at the boma. And so the Warriors have actually been able to continue their work throughout the pandemic using, of course, safe practices all along, but they've really held the tide at a time when indeed some tensions have been rising. And one of the reasons why I think we've managed to weather this storm quite well is because of how important the big cats are to the community, and how they've really begun to feel that, you know, lions have and always will be part of the society. And the Warriors for Wildlife do a wonderful job of continuing to remind people of that, even during difficult times, that this wildlife is part of their culture, their heritage, and their future. And of course, they've also been working very hard to install our signature living walls. These are environmentally friendly, predator-proof corrals. You see in the background there, beautiful Kilimanjaro. And thanks very much to many of our supporters. I'm extremely pleased to be able to say that we were able to double our annual installations of living walls this year. So thank you to so many generous people out there and institutions and foundations that recognize this was a time when we really needed to support people as much as possible. So we have installed an incredible number of living walls. There are more than 1,300 of them across northern Tanzania today. And they're one of the reasons why we see lions bouncing back in the Tarangire ecosystem. In some of our other landscapes, we're also seeing preliminary recovery of the lion populations in a way that also works for people, where you see drastic declines in lions taking livestock. So we're also protecting local people's livelihoods. And of course, they're very invested in this. They pay for part of the cost of the chain link fencing, and they plant the live trees, which make up the living wall. So it's really a win for people and a win for wildlife, and also a win for environment, because people no longer need to cut down trees to fortify their corrals. And so in places where living walls have been in place for a very long time, we're actually seeing recovery of the habitat as well, which has additional benefits for both people and wildlife. And other updates, again, I think this is a time when, as Gladys also mentioned, having a holistic conservation model is absolutely important. There's no question that tourism and revenue from wildlife conservation is critical. As Gladys mentioned, 60% of Uganda's Wildlife Authority is, driving revenue from tourism. But we also have to work on other strategies. And our Rangelands program is a way of helping local community members to resurrect traditional grazing practices, to really begin to reinforce grazing regimes, dry season and wet season grazing regimes, so that in very difficult times, there still is a reserve of pasture for livestock to feed upon. And of course, this has benefits for wildlife as well. In northern Tanzania, people are, again, extremely tolerant of living with wildlife. So where we have good pasture for livestock, we often see as well the critical wildlife populations, wildebeest, the zebra, buffalo, eland, giraffe, also out on those pastures. We've been able to develop a wonderful system for helping people to monitor the quality of their pastures in real time. In fact, I'm very pleased to mention that the team won an award from Esri this year, standing out from about 100,000 companies for their ability to bring technology to local resource management. What you're seeing actually is a dashboard here of a community that's monitoring plots and looking at grassland quality. They're looking at invasive species, the height of the grass. That's the middle chart that you see there. They're giving an indication of what they think the quality of the pasture is. And on the right-hand side, you'll see those photos. Those are really important because they take a picture of the area and they can compare month by month the quality of the pasture. And this information goes back to village grazing committees and pastoral councils and helps them to make decisions about the management of their rangelands. And so in areas where people are utilizing the system, we've seen the return, the revitalization of the grasses. We're seeing higher grass height, better greenness, retention of soil moisture. And we're also seeing wild species return to these pastures as well. So it's a very exciting initiative that we continue to grow. And again, we're seeing where this project is in place, we're also seeing important outcomes for wildlife conservation. This is the fringe-eared oryx. Tanzania has a very endangered subpopulation of fringe-eared oryx. It used to be around 2,400 and declined to probably less than 400. And now we see more than 25% of the population in communal rangelands around our environmental center, where good pasture protection has also welcomed the oryx back. So again, very exciting to see that happening. Well, our youth environmental education program this year was challenging. It was very hard to see the schools closed down, and unlike other places in the world, many of the kids, most of the kids, they don't have access to online education. We did work through radio networks with some of our partners. We unfortunately had to cancel a lot of our youth environmental education programs because they do involve large groups of children. And so this is a photo of one of our last national park trips before we had to shut that down. But the team pivoted, and right now we're working on a virtual tour of Tarangire National Park for the children. So we've been filming that, and we'll be making that available to the schools around Tarangire National Park and even wider in Tanzania. And so in some senses, more children will have access to kind of seeing the interior of Tarangire National Park, what it means for wildlife conservation, but it's also a great opportunity to see all the potential jobs and future possibilities for these children. So we talk to park managers, we talk to guides, we talk to people working in the lodges, and doing all sorts of jobs. So really opening the children's eyes to the possibilities for the future. And we hope that'll be coming out soon. And then our Women's Enterprise Project, another demonstration of how important it is to have holistic programming. We just recently added 25 new women's groups to this program. Again, thanks to generous support and previous support that we already had, we were able to continue full steam ahead with this project. And so now we're working with more than 100 women's groups and about 1,500 women who are harvesting their own honey. And this year was one of our best harvest years. So the women have already harvested over 4.5 tons of wild acacia honey. So that's really exciting. And of course, where they hang their hives in the wild bush, you cannot cut down the trees that the hives are hung in, and you may not cultivate in the vicinity of the hives because Tanzania really wants to promote wild bee propagation. So it's an exciting project that again has a win for people and a win for wildlife. And what you're seeing in the upper left-hand screen, haven't shared this photo with anyone yet, so this is the first one, but we are about to debut the opening of the first Women's Enterprise Center in northern Tanzania. And this center will be equipped and is currently being equipped with state-of-the-art honey processing equipment, and is an effort now to help the women to be able to sell their honey at a higher price point. So to cut out the middlemen and really work to package, label, sell their honey to shops in Arusha and Dar es Salaam, and of course the lodges and the tourism companies once they get back up online again. So again, we've been very fortunate to be able to keep some of these projects running, and of course they're bringing in important revenue to these families at a time when the revenue from tourism unfortunately has disappeared. We hope it'll be coming back soon and we can invite lots more people back to Tanzania. It's been a rough year for everyone, but I do feel like the horizon is starting to change. It's starting to become bright. For African People and Wildlife, next year we'll be celebrating 15 years, our 15th year of conservation and sustainable development in Tanzania. We have some very exciting new projects online, so I hope you'll check in with us and follow us on social media or other ways to see what's on the horizon. And I hope this also symbolizes the hope that we have for the future for the global community as we move forward. So with that, I'll say thank you very much. And thank you again, Gladys, for inviting me to speak today. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Layli. That's a great presentation with very beautiful pictures. And it's great that you've kept going in spite of the pandemic. That's very encouraging. And yeah, we look forward to celebrating 15 years of African People and Wildlife next year. And our next speaker is Vance from South Africa. We look forward to his presentation.
Thank you, Gladys, and my friends and colleagues in the Africa chapter. It's an honor to be here with you on this video to talk a little bit about the Wild Foundation and what we do in Africa. I'm officed in Boulder, Colorado. The Wild Foundation is a U.S. nonprofit organization, but we began as an African organization. We were founded in South Africa in the 60s by Ian Player, the famous conservationist, who, with his Zulu brother, mentor, friend Makubu Ntombela, they founded us and founded several other organizations. And of course, they led the team that saved the white rhino from extinction back in the early 60s, working where the only population of the southern white rhino existed at that time, and that was in the Umfolozi Game Reserve. So we really are an African organization. Africa's not a second home to me. It's home. It's possible to have more than one home. But I love being there. I've, I don't know, so many times, 100, 130, 40, I don't know, since the mid-'80s. During those early days, I had the great pleasure of meeting Laurie Marker. And Laurie and I have conspired ever since that time. The Wild Foundation was very honored to step up when Laurie moved from the States to Namibia and founded the Cheetah Conservation Fund. We ran the shop in the States. For about 10 years, I was president, and I was working with Laurie just about every day, either in Namibia or in the States or some other place. We would converge all over the place and still do. So really our work in Africa, especially right now, it's also part of what we call Wilderness Foundation Global, which is a nonprofit based in South Africa. And it consists of the groups that Ian Player and Makubu founded. So we work very closely with Andrew Muir and his team at the Wilderness Foundation Africa. At the Wilderness Leadership School, that's Cheryl Curry and her team. And then in the UK, Wilderness Foundation UK, Joe Roberts and her team. So I have personally, in Wild, over the many years now, I've worked all around Southern Africa. We have not worked very much as far as having on-the-ground projects go in East Africa, because that's always been very well covered. Many people don't know that back in the 80s and even in the early 90s, the Southern Africa and the 10 countries of the South were all the conservation work was done by local organizations and done well, pioneering a lot of conservation solutions. That kind of conservation work, that heritage that went back to mid 1900s, is what informed me and trained me, and all the others in our alliance as well. So that's why we wanted Wilderness Foundation Global to be based in South Africa, not only to honor our legacy, but to send a message to the world that conservation solutions have, can, and will continue to be generated out of the South. North America and Europe has always had a big footprint in Africa and elsewhere around the world in conservation and many other things. But we wanted to change that. The work that Laurie's doing, Layli, so many others, these are global models for conservation, working with communities, working with holistic conservation. Really powerful stuff. We can be very proud of it because we're going to be doing a lot more, all of us. So all those years in Southern Africa, of course, I've, kind of know everybody and value those friendships. Another very close working relationship with the Peace Parks Foundation, based in Stellenbosch in South Africa. I work very closely with Werner Myburg and his team. There's Friends of Peace Parks, the USA, which is based here at Wild's office. And I'm president of Friends of Peace Parks and all that stuff. And, helping create these transfrontier protected areas, large conservation landscapes is probably a better expression. Working with very good friends from government level to community level, board members. Another member of our chapter, Jason Paterniti, is very involved as well. doing very good work, and it's extensive work. Everything from new financial conservation mechanisms to carbon storage, ecotourism, infrastructure building, capacity building, and a lot of rewilding. So that's so much for the South. And we also work quite a bit in West Africa. 2002 or 2003, we teamed up with Ian Douglas Hamilton of Save the Elephants, based in Kenya, of course, but Ian had been working for a few years with this herd of desert-adapted elephants, the most northernmost African elephants who do the longest migration ever recorded, the large circular migration right in the center of Mali. And Ian was so busy, we worked together for a while, and then he asked us to kind of take care of things for a while, and that was 18 years ago. Still consult, of course, closely with Ian, but it's really a Malian team that we've created that does all the heavy lifting. It's their project, 100% Malian in country, and we have, there's 600 guys on camels who patrol an area the size of Switzerland called the Gourma. The project has been so successful, the team has done so well that the Gourma will be expanded. The expansion has been approved, but it needs to be voted on by Parliament once government reconvenes and restructures after the most recent coup. I have to say, though, since this recent coup, the government has been working very well. I know that might be a not politically correct thing to say, but I need to say that right now they're doing a good job, and we're very pleased to work with them. And so the community-based community empowerment project, it's all about the local people controlling their own resources, benefiting from them, managing them. And it's gone well. And then it got hard. With the invasions and a couple of coups and a tremendous amount of instability. And so it's not been easy. Our team has done fantastically well. They've also teamed up. We made arrangements with MINUSMA, the UN deployment. The UN deployment, by the way, is referred to by the UN as their most dangerous deployment in the world. And of course, the Mali Army. We helped to structure with Chingeta Wildlife counter-poaching teams to protect the elephant range and protect the resources for the people. And all the teams have medical personnel with them. Our Malian team takes care of the villagers. They're very proud of that. We're very proud of them. In fact, the local people call our counter-poaching teams the Gentle Army, and I think that's very cool. So maybe to pay for our sins, the EU asked us to help out in Burkina to take our model there, and we said we would do it. We thought a lot about it because Burkina is arguably more difficult than Mali. So we're operating there until that gets set up. And on we go. We're very proud of that work, very proud of the Mali team taking care of things and taking care of the villagers. So I'm going to end with a little tape from Mali to show you the elephants. But before I do, I just want to, in closing, say, the Wild Foundation loves Africa. It's our home, but we work around the world. We work extensively with the IUCN on protected area policy. I founded and co-chair the Wilderness Specialist Group in the World Commission on Protected Areas. Wild has Coalition Wild, which is a global network of young professionals and youth doing conservation work. Fabulous. We do a number of things, work in China, India, intergovernmentally across North America. So life is busy. I'm officed in Boulder, Colorado. Year. It's kind of interesting to be here. It's a good place to be locked down, but I'm ready to go, I have to tell you. So here's a little bit of Mali. You'll see the elephants, you'll see the habitat. God bless. Thank you very much. And all Godspeed for the holidays and for 2021. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vance. That's been very interesting to hear about your work, and I'd really love to meet the desert elephant. And our next speaker is Praveen Moman, he's going to tell us all about his work, but he's one of the very first tour operators to work with the great apes in Africa to promote responsible tourism. So it's a good follow-up to the talk that I've just given about our work to mitigate the impact of COVID-19 on gorilla conservation. Praveen, we welcome you onto the stage.
Thank you very much, Gladys. Thank you, everybody else who's speaking today. And thank you, of course, for the Explorers Club for involving us and letting us share our work. So I'd like to start today just by sharing a short clip of our work around Virunga Lodge in Rwanda. you will have seen in this clip what, of course, is a very magical and unique part of Africa, a very unique landscape around the Virunga volcanoes, which are in the very heart of Africa, on the border of Rwanda, Uganda, and the DRC. And Volcano Safaris works in Uganda and in Rwanda. And I had the privilege, like Gladys, to be born in Uganda, what seems to be a very long time ago. And I have family associations with it for over 100 years. And although I was born in Uganda, I then came to Europe in the 70s in the changing times of turmoil in East Africa. And then finally in 1997, I went back to Uganda first and then to Rwanda to set up Volcano Safaris. And Volcano Safaris has 4 lodges in the area now, 3 in Uganda and 1 in Rwanda. But the lodges in themselves to us are less important in a curious way. What is important to us are the ecotourism programs we have established around them. And I just want to talk to you about 1 or 2 of examples of the ecotourism programs we have ended up setting up and the lessons we have learned from them. And I think that's what I find really inspiring and challenging and important for the future. And it's interesting that Gladys and I work in parallel fields. She, of course, works on gorilla health matters, which is especially critical today. And our conversation today comes at a critical juncture, doesn't it, about the future of conservation, the future of tourism, the connection with communities, and of course, the whole business of disease. Now, as humans, of course, we are daily living the impact of the pandemic in different ways in different countries. And we are all concerned for ourselves and our families. And of course, there have been some people who've suffered a lot. But as Gladys pointed out in her presentation earlier on, you cannot ignore the impact of COVID on the health of the great apes. Because of course, the great apes, the gorillas and chimps and the other species are very closely connected to us, 97 point whatever it is % of DNA. And we often share the same diseases. And as many of you will know, man is the greatest threat for gorillas and for chimpanzees and for other great ape species, not only because we compete for the same habitat. And of course, human beings need more and more land for agriculture, so they would happily cut down the forest, but because our whole development and consumption issues are now affecting other species. And now this biggest challenge of disease. And of course, as we've heard from Gladys and others, there have been COVID type diseases before that have impacted on great apes. And we've had Ebola, which has decimated great ape populations in certain national parks in the Congo Basin. So at this point, it's very, very important that whatever we do about tourism and conservation and their link to communities, we get right the whole business of safeguarding not only humans on the planet, but the great apes, because they could suffer dramatically from the impact of this disease through us. What is interesting about the gorillas particularly, the mountain gorillas, is there's just over 1,000 left, 1,060, and they live in this tiny, fragile habitat. If we were to put it in context, it's about 700 square meters. And if you look at Yellowstone, which of course is America's oldest park and one of the greatest parks in the world, that is 70,000 square meters. And if you look at the Alps in Europe, that is 30,000 square meters. So this is a tiny habitat in which you have 1,000 gorillas. In some ways, it's a great success story. Since the 1960s, when various researchers, and especially, of course, Dian Fossey, started working with them, the population of gorillas has been slowly increasing. So from the population of about 300 in the 1960s, we have, as I said, just over 1,000. So that's a great success story. But it's a very fragile population where anything, especially disease, as we've discussed, would wipe it out. The other thing is to kind of balance the tourism angle. As a tourism practitioner who's been working in this field for over 20 years, we've learned a lot. And being the pioneers of great ape tourism in Uganda and then in Rwanda, we were the first people to go into Rwanda after the war and build Virunga Lodge, which you saw earlier, in 2004, 10 years after the genocide. Fossey was very concerned when she worked with the gorillas in the 1960s about the impact of tourism on the gorillas. Fossey was rightly concerned about the health of the gorillas, as am I, and she was very concerned about the impact of tourism. What I would say after 20 odd years of pioneering gorilla ecotourism, that I disagree in some ways with Fossey. I think it was right that she flagged up the impact of too much human contact with gorillas and the impact on them. But at the same time, I think if you do not have tourism, I don't think the gorillas will survive. And the reason for that is that the fact that you have tourism puts gorillas and chimpanzees and other wildlife in Africa part of the economic supply chain. It gives them economic value. And that economic value, I believe, is important to their protection and their safeguarding for the future, because it gives local communities a stake in their future. Otherwise, local people, quite rightly, would not have much interest in the gorillas. But because gorilla tourism and the money they get from the actual gorilla permit and from the whole gorilla economy and the chimpanzee economy, local people have a much bigger interest in them. They, of course, themselves would not pay, say, $1,500, as you do in Rwanda, to see the gorillas. But the money that they get helps build their economy, helps put bread on the table, helps produce schooling for their children, helps improve their health, and gives roads in their area. So that is what is critical, especially for communities who are amongst the poorest in the world, and some only live on a few dollars a day, and especially in an area where the population density is very high, with 600 to 700 people per square kilometer around the parks. And I would just like to mention two projects that we have done. I didn't want to show all the videos today of them, but you can always look them up online separately. One is to do with chimpanzees. And it's particularly apt that we talk about chimps today, because of course, this year is the 60th anniversary of Jane Goodall's pioneering work with chimps in the Gombe Park in Tanzania. Gombe 60, as it's called, in Gombe Stream, showed how closely chimps were related to us and how they used tools and how they were such intelligent, sentient beings. Well, we're working in Uganda, where we have a lodge called Chambura Gorge Lodge. And over the last 10 years, we have been working on what we call the Chambura Gorge Ecotourism Project. And the Ecotourism Project has sought to link our lodge with the communities and the habitat and the economic chain nearby. So we've recreated a wetland that was an illegal brickworks at the head of the gorge, just outside the park, which was becoming an increasing pollution issue for the chimps and the river. We then, over the last 10 years, slowly built up a 3-kilometer buffer zone to separate the gorge, to separate the gorge from the communities around, in order that there's less animal-wildlife conflict, which, as we know, can be very, very difficult in such areas. We've also created a series of projects to improve economic livelihoods, such as training of youngsters in hospitality, creating a coffee cooperative, setting up beekeeping, and building an elephant trench. And more latterly, we're going to launch in the new year a new project to do COVID training with the communities around, so that they are sensitized fully to the impact of this. The other project I want to talk about is what we have done in Mugahinga, again in Uganda, which is an example of, again, people and animal issues. When the park of Mugahinga was created on the Ugandan side of the Virungas in 1991, there was a community of Batwa, of the so-called pygmies who lived in the forest, as there was in the forest of Windi in Uganda. And when the park has been created, there's been, in my opinion, an oversight in that the Batwa have been asked to leave the forest. And the Batwa are the oldest indigenous inhabitants of this part of the Central African forest. But by asking them to leave to safeguard gorillas, their own livelihoods and their own well-being has not been thought through. So they have become disenfranchised and marginalized, and they have become conservation refugees in effect, without any land, without any livelihood, and without any rights. So we're very proud that 2 years ago, we set up the Gahinga Batwa village near the Lodge of Gahinga and just outside the park of Mugahinga, which houses 100 people, including children. And so today they can live in the shadow of their beloved volcanoes, and there's hope for the future. And their children can go to school and slowly have better health and try and fit into a modern life, which has been very difficult for them to do. So I would say from that experience, in my experience, that we must not make the wildlife more important than people. People must also be part of the conservation chain in an equal way. And these projects that we've done, I don't want to go through all of them that we have been doing in different areas, basically have shown us 2 or 3 points that I would like to share with you. One is that, as I said before, conservation has to be part of the economic mainstream. It has to pay. And this might sound odd or confrontational. It's not meant to be. It's just to make sure that all of us who work in conservation and tourism realize how important it is to a country, to a government, to its people. And the only way to do that is to bring it into the economic life of a country. And then governments take it seriously. Because otherwise running national parks is quite expensive and quite difficult, as we all know. And you need some contribution towards that. Secondly, that sensitive and controlled tourism is critical for the great apes to survive. If you don't have any tourism, I think the apes will not survive. And if you have too much tourism, they will also suffer. So it's this delicate balance that we must all do. And as Gladys rightly talked about the 7-meter rule and not interacting with gorillas, that's very important. And lastly, and possibly the most important aspect of this, that the focus of conservation and tourism must be on the communities. It's only when wilderness produces a return for the economy, for society, for the people, especially the poor people of an area, that there will be a success in making sure the animals survive. Otherwise, I don't think they will. So making conservation part of the economic mainstream is key. And this, I think, will become more critical in the years ahead, given the rapid changes in Africa this century. Africa now, as we know, is the fastest urbanizing continent. There are 20 new cities of 20 million people in the next 20 years that are projected. And consumption of Western-style goods is taking over. So pollution, population, water, health are going to become major challenges. And wilderness and conservation can't be put on a pedestal. They must compete so that we ensure that the wildlife and the protected areas do survive and are not forgotten in the rush to just go for extractive industries. So that's my central message today, and I hope that's been useful. And I hope in our own small way, we're contributing to this work and trying to make sure that the future is modeled in a sensitive way based around these special species. Thank you, Gladys. Thank you, Leah. I just wanted to quickly show this clip of our work with the Batwa and Gahinga because it's central to some of our conversation. So please let me introduce that video. Thank you. We all do tourism in effect for ourselves. We do conservation work for ourselves. But I've often thought that we who are the privileged of the world really need to think again about how we turn this paradigm around, so that we're not doing it for ourselves, but we do it for the poorest communities in Africa. Throughout the world, there have been moments when we haven't handled the human and wildlife interaction well. And the Batwa is a classic example of that in modern times in Uganda. This is 1991, as you know. In Mugahinga, they said, okay, this is now going to be a national park for the conservation of gorillas, and the Batwa who have lived there for millennia can no longer live there. They became what is called conservation refugees. they were not given any other land or any other rights or compensation. I found a people that was stranded, a people without dignity, and were at the margins of society. We also created what is called a heritage trail at our lodge in Gahinga, where you could share some of their life, how they used to hunt, share how their medicinal herbs were made. This has now taken us on another journey. We bought some land for them last year to build their own homes. The Batwa are one of the oldest surviving indigenous peoples in the Central African forests. They are our forefathers. Today we are very, very proud to officially launch the Gahinga Batwa village. Why are we not marshalling their old history and their connection to their forest and their safeguarding of the forest in the modern world? This is crucial. We cannot just have parks that look after wildlife. Somehow they must look after communities. It is a landmark project, and it is a privilege to be able to support the Gahinga Batwa in this small way. Finally, they have a proper home in the shadow of their beloved volcanoes. These are some of the most beautiful areas in Africa. The communities of this area have suffered some of the most, and it's important to bring hope to these areas. I'm sure if we work with the Batwa and the wider communities here, they will do their part to help preserve the park and help gorilla conservation and tourism. And I do believe we all need to work hard at righting the wrongs that indigenous communities have had.
Very much, Praveen. Very nice presentation, giving a different perspective on the whole gorilla conservation story and great ape, responsible great ape tourism, and balancing the needs between economics and conservation, which are very delicate but are totally interlinked. Thank you very much. And we're now going to go to our next speaker, Dr. Ian Clark, who's doing some work in Uganda. He's a very famous doctor in Uganda, wrote a book called The Man with the Key Has Gone, after he came to Uganda to set up a hospital in the Luwero Triangle during the time before even the current president was president, shortly after the very big Luwero War. So we look forward to hearing his talk and about what he's doing right now. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I want to play a short video. As Gladys said, I've been in Uganda for quite a long time. I am a medical doctor. I've been involved in setting up a couple of hospitals, but I'm also a sort of social entrepreneur. So I've done various businesses in Uganda. The latest one is in coffee. If you ask what coffee has got to do with healthcare, it's healthcare is really multi-sectoral. If people have better incomes, we know they have better health. If they're better educated, they understand the message is better, and so on. So in the last 5 years, I've been involved in setting up a coffee farm. I'll just play a short video. It's about 4 minutes of what I'm doing on the farm.
My name's Ian Clark. I've lived in Uganda for over 30 years. I'm a physician and a social entrepreneur. For most of my time, I've been involved in the health sector. I've built a faith-based hospital and I built a commercial hospital, also a university and school. But more recently, I've got involved in farming. This is me. I'm standing and looking out over my farm, which is 1,500 acres, mainly based on coffee, but also doing other things, as you see, such as matoke, bananas, goats, trees, and chickens. With the chicken manure and the vegetative matter from maize cobs, and the pulp from coffee, we mix it all up and we make nice compost. We also run a large nursery where we are able to grow our coffee seedlings, some from seed and some from cuttings. We also grow trees. This is trees you're seeing right now. And for the trees, we intersperse around the coffee here some other varieties of trees because we have some nice waterways in the farm. There's a natural forest beside us. So we kind of like trees. The farm is a commercial farm, but it's also a demonstration farm for local farmers so that they can see good agronomy in coffee. This is young coffee that's about a year old that's been planted. And we plant both Prono coffee and A-Light coffee. And the coffee is almost all Robusta. Now, Robusta coffee is peculiar to Uganda. They say Uganda, the home of Robusta. Robusta is often taken as a low-grade coffee, but if it's handled well, you can get much better prices. It gives you very good, full-bodied coffee with lots of caffeine. Very good for espressos and also for milky coffees. So we're trying to teach local farmers how to get the best out of their coffee. In terms of the planting, the agronomy, the tending it, the picking of it, and so on. Here there is a mother garden, so we take the cuttings from this. In the background, you've actually got some macadamia, and just on the right, yes, there's an apiary, because also bees are very good in terms of the pollination. So it's picking season at the moment, and we have some coffee pickers. This is in the mature part of the plantation, which was planted just about 5 years ago, and then you see there's more tree cover in this part of it. So the pickers come, most of them from the local villages, and good time at the minute because COVID has put people under pressure, so it's a good source of income for people. When they pick the coffee, they also clean below the trees to control for insects and pests, berry bugs, and these other things that give you poor quality coffee. And we teach all this both to the local people and the local farmers. They're the guys cleaning up his coffee. We employ a lot of women because they're actually good at picking coffee, because it has to be cherry picked. You pick the right cherries, and Robusta is the sort of coffee that sometimes it has both flowers and red berries and green berries, and you have to just pick the green berries. At the present time, it's the beginning of the coffee picking, so they have to be careful that they don't pick the green berries. When we have this coffee picked, we're able to actually process it through a thing called wet processing, which gives us much better coffee. And we're putting up a big plant so that we can actually have a smallholder scheme, so that we will provide coffee through our nursery. The plants, then we will teach them through the demonstration farm and through their smallholding farms. We'll also encourage them to use compost, organic compost, and thus we'll improve livelihoods. This is coffee drying on the ground with Robusta. We can actually sun dry it after we've pulped it. This is what we call parchment, the light coloured coffee, and this we will dry down and then store in bags until it's ready for sale, and then we will put it into green bean. This is the big and under construction, is a much larger plant that we have for processing the coffee. So that the idea is we should have a demonstration farm and a smallholder scheme.
Very much, Ian. That's a great presentation. And talking about climate change, actually the coffee farmers around Bwindi and other parts of Uganda who grow Arabica are suffering this year. There's possibly due to climate change, there's very little coffee that has been able to be harvested this year. I don't know if it's affected Robusta as well, but it's definitely affected Arabica coffee and our farmers and other farmers in Uganda. So yeah, climate change is an issue with all those kind of things. But it's great that Ian's really helping to get Ugandan coffee known around the world. Yeah, because Uganda is famous for two things right now: coffee for a very long time and gorillas more recently. So it's great. And actually, Ian also sits on the board of the Bwindi and Mugahinga Conservation Trust, where I also sit. And that's a trust that was created in the 90s to make sure that communities around the park benefit from gorilla conservation. Yeah, great. So now we're going on to the last presenter, who's Dr. Laurie Maka. She's the Jane Goodall of the cheetah world. We look forward to your presentation. Actually, I first met Laurie in San Diego in 2008 when she won the Lifetime Achievement Award from San Diego Zoo, and I won the Conservation in Action Award. And since then, we've been meeting through different forums, Wildlife Conservation Network, and she's a mentor mentor to me. Keeps me going when things are keeps encouraging me when things get really tough, as they do when you're trying to make a difference in conservation. Layli we also share a lot of notes with Layli as well.
Great crowd. Thank you so much, Gladys. And getting the chapter going in Africa, I think, is really important. So I'm going to just turn over. I have a presentation that I'd like to present, and I hope that you'll enjoy it. Thank you. Hi, I'm Dr. Lori Marker, and I'm the founder and executive director of the Cheetah Conservation Fund. I've been an Explorer Club member since 2008. I'd like to share with you very briefly a little bit about 30 years of Cheetah Conservation Fund. This year we're celebrating our 30th anniversary of the Cheetah Conservation Fund, and there's a lot of history behind that. Of course, the cheetahs are the fastest of all the land animals and the most amazing of all the big cats, but also Africa's most endangered big cat. Their threats are that of habitat loss, illegal wildlife trade, human-wildlife conflict in very low numbers. Their populations are fragmented and they have lack of genetic diversity. Work that we did back in the early 80s that has carried on through our research for all of these years. I started back in 1974 studying the cheetah at a wildlife park in Oregon. And this cheetah here, her name's Kayam, actually took me to Namibia in 1977, where I was founding research, trying to find out if a captive-born cheetah could learn how to hunt. She learned how to hunt, I learned how to hunt, but I also found that farmers were killing cheetahs like flies. 800 to 900 cheetahs a year. Shoot, shovel, shut up. The cheetahs were going through their ranch lands. They were catching them in traps. And I needed to know, for the world, the world needed to know what was happening with wild cheetahs. And so I took it on as my mission to try to find out what we could do to try to save the cheetah. And in order to do this, I needed to know why the farmers were killing so many cheetahs and how to stop them. Today, there are less than 7,500 cheetahs left in the world. We're based in Namibia, down here, with also a base up in Somaliland. Most all of the cheetahs are found outside of protected areas, in those dark orange areas. We've lost 90% of their range, which is where the cheetahs were 100 years ago, throughout that light yellow area. Most of the cheetahs are found outside of protected areas, which is why we have to work with people so closely, livestock farmers, pastoralists, nomads. There's 31 populations in 23 countries. 20 of those populations are under 100 individuals. This is very serious. I founded the Cheetah Conservation Fund in 1990. We're based in Namibia, but we work globally. We're the leading conservation organization for cheetahs, for the wild cheetah. We've got a research center, education training center, sanctuary, genetics laboratory, and vet clinic here in Namibia on 54,000 hectares of wildlife reserve and model farmland. We also have a private guest lodge and welcome you to come and visit us at any time. Our mission is to try to keep cheetahs living free and in the wild. And we do this through an integrated systems approach: research, conservation, education, and stewardship. Up in Somaliland in the Horn of Africa, which is a breakaway country from Somalia, we've set up a sanctuary. Today we have, unfortunately, 30 cheetahs here. These cubs have all been confiscated by the Ministry of Environment and Rural Development in Somaliland, as they were due to cross that coast over there to be part of the illegal wildlife trade. The demand is great in the Middle East. Over 300 cheetahs a year are being going over into the Horn of Africa annually. For every one cub that makes it into the hands of these rich private owners, probably about 5 of them die. We've been studying this trade since 2005, and now for the last 3 years have been deep into it in Somaliland. Currently we have 60 cheetahs there, 1 leopard. 29 of these cubs were just confiscated in the past 3 months. I've just come back from spending 2 months in the Somaliland area, and I'm going back soon. Our sanctuary is large, and we have great partnerships. We're working together with the Ministry of Environment and Rural Development. We just signed a 30-year MOU with them, as well as working on trying to stop the illegal wildlife trade with our partners funded by DEFRA in LICIT, the Legal Intelligence for Cheetah Illicit Trade.
This is little Ayan, and she's one of the 60 cheetah cubs here in Somaliland that we are taking care of that have been rescued from the illegal wildlife trade. She's one of the younger ones. You can see some cheetahs behind me there. After 30 years, we've tried hard to put our conservation research into effect to try to help save cheetahs. Cheetahs in the wild for the future. And it's really sad that we have to deal with these confiscated cubs, and many of them come in so sick and weak and unhealthy.
But my research started 45 years ago, and much of the work that we've done is to collect blood samples, biological samples, understand how the cheetah's living, looking at their genetics, the overall health of these animals. We put over 600 of the cheetahs in Namibia back out into the wild, but it's still not enough. We have so much more to do. And education becomes the most important thing. Farmers, communities, children, policymakers, global audiences, and veterinarians. We work with them all, and we are continuing to do that. In addition, we actually breed and raise livestock guarding dogs. Our program is 25 years old. We've placed almost 700 dogs in those years. We see between an 80 to 100% reduction in livestock loss. This is critical. Putting cheetahs back in the wild is very, very difficult. And so we want to save them in the wild. We want to make sure that they're living happily. We've studied them through ecology, radio collars, satellite collars on them. We understand how they hunt and how they live. And with that, we need to make sure that they're living in the wild and reproducing for future generations. I've spent over 45 years of my life trying to save the cheetah, and today they need all the help that they can still get. So I welcome you to help us save the cheetah and learn more about the work that we do. Please go to our website, cheetah.org. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Laurie. That was a great presentation. I really need to come and visit you in Namibia and see how all the great work you're doing at Cheetah Conservation Fund, and hopefully we'll also host you in Uganda one day as well. Show your work with the gorillas. And so we are now, I want to hand over to Tim. Thank you so much for hosting us today. And
thank you. Thank you all for your presentation. It was really wonderful. We're going to open it up for questions now. So Anne, do you have some questions for our guests?
Ashley, of course, we all have questions. And unfortunately, because this is pre-taped and coming from Africa, I think we're the ones that are going to be asking most of the questions. But first of all, I want to thank Gladys for putting together just an amazing group of people. And it was so incredibly informative to all of us to learn about, how did you put it, conservation refugees, Praveen, fascinating. Can you just expand on, you're muted, but could you just expand on that a little bit more? Because we never really hear about this part of it. We hear about climate refugees and government refugees, but we really don't hear about conservation refugees.
Thank you very much, Anne. I mean, I think many of us who are privileged people, and that's how I define people like ourselves, we tend to get interested in, wonderful things like wildlife and wilderness and ecosystems and, of course, particular species. And I'm certainly one of them. My father was obsessed with wilderness when we were growing up in Africa as children, and that's what his life was. We went to every national park we could in East Africa. We got to know about so many places and species. And I first went to the Virungas when I was 12 years old, when Dian Fossey had just started working there. So that's what, the average life person's experience is, isn't it? But I think we sometimes forget what is happening in the neighborhood. We go in as kind of clever people thinking, wow, I want to save this habitat. I want to save these species. But actually, usually that neighborhood has its own community, has its own people. And my journey over the last 20 odd years has been very clearly to say, hey guys, let's not forget them. They are a prime part of this puzzle. Number one, that they get economic benefit from it. As I said, an average poor person in Uganda and Rwanda is not going to go gorilla trekking. They don't study, biological sciences or anthropology or something at university. They're just surviving. So number one is to involve them in the whole process of conservation and make sure that they are getting sustainable benefit that is worthwhile, to educate their children and to make sure that they have something to eat. Otherwise, they wouldn't want the land. And secondly, when we create protected areas, and this is not only in East Africa, throughout history, as we've seen in Europe and in America as well, indigenous peoples often have just been removed for the sake of creating a national park. And I think that is not a sensitive and an appropriate way of proceeding. And I just lived this with the Batwa people around Gahinga. When I started going there in 1997, it was a difficult moment. There was the war on and this and that. We had difficulties getting our business started. But eventually the lodge got set up and it was, began to do something. And all around this period, we would have the Batwa at our gate begging in a state of intoxication on the edge. And you think, well, why are these people like this? And your natural reaction is to shoo them away. But when you look at it, these people have lost their homeland. They were hunter-gatherers in a forest for centuries, if not for millennia. So my point is, we must not create conservation refugees like this. It's fine to create wildlife parks and fine to safeguard gorillas and chimps and other animals, but in doing that, other worthwhile solutions, land rights, have to be found for people who are displaced from such things. So they are not just made, conservation refugees and become thrown on the scrap heap of history. And you're muted.
Yeah.
Thank you, Praveen. Thank you so much. Gladys, the story about Rafiki was just heartbreaking. We're seeing this clear across different continents where people really just don't have the funds anymore. They don't have the wherewithal, the livelihoods, and they're going into the bush to feed their families. I understand that you're doing everything you can about it, and what an incredible presentation that you made with all these different alternatives for people, to live by. But till they actually are able to afford and create a livelihood for themselves out of that, what do we do in the meantime?
Yeah, it's really hard. But I mean, that's probably why, that's one of the reasons why we got into providing fast growing seedlings. I never really thought I'd get into emergency food relief when we started the NGO, because I don't believe in emergency things too much because they're not sustainable. But we found that, people were hungry. That's why they were poaching. The borders with DRC were locked, so they couldn't go. Some of them had planted their crops in DRC and couldn't go back to harvest them during lockdown. And so people in Bwindi have come to rely totally on tourism, which is great when tourism is there. Their whole future is around tourism. Many of them stopped farming and doing the things that they used to do when guerrilla tourism began. When I first started working with the gorillas, there were only 2 habituated gorilla groups. For tourism now, there's 20, and during that time, Praveen had one of the first lodges, and now there's so many lodges. It's like, I don't know, over 50 lodges around Bwindi National Park. Crazy. And so people have grown so much to depend on tourism. And suddenly when tourism went from being there to disappearing overnight, they didn't know how to survive. And so we're just finding, like lots of things, like let's say, trying to get markets abroad for their products like coffee or crafts, providing emergency food relief means that they can feed themselves. And these are fast growing seedlings which grow within 1 to 4 months. 10 different vegetables. That includes cabbages, maize, beans, groundnuts, and all the kinds of spinach. And it just keeps them going. And even when tourism comes back, they still have something to eat. And when tourists are around, the money from tourism doesn't go to feed themselves, but to do other things like paying school fees or other things like that. So that's the whole plan, is that as much as it was an emergency food relief, it was also very good for a long-term sustainability structure. And the way that we're doing it is sustainable, so using sustainable ways of farming, using soil and water conservation methods, so that they can plant a lot on a small plot and just keep going, so that tourism isn't what feeds them, but what helps them to do other things as well in their lives. The pandemic has really shown us that you can't just depend on tourism in order to sustain conservation and to keep communities, well fed and, to keep community well-being going. You have to also think of other ways to support communities. And actually, there's
Laura,
just to add to that was developed when Rafiki died. That was a huge shock, because actually my very first reaction was, how can you kill a gorilla when it's done so much for your community? That was my first reaction. And we found out later that actually this poacher was from one of the poorest of the poor in Bwindi. Praveen has talked about the conservation refugees. He's amongst us, one of the poorest of the poor in the community. And we have to find a way of uplifting these people in order to prevent such tragedies occurring, like what happened to Rafiki. And there's a musician, Ugandan musician called Gasuza, who created a very nice song. And hopefully we'll be able to play it on the Chapter Connect. It's available on Amazon, Spotify, and all these platforms. And I think he's raising money for conservation. Some of those.
I'm hoping that all of you will give us links that we can put at the end of this program, so that the people in the audience who are actually watching this Chapter Connect can reach out to each one of you individually and ask you the questions that they would like to ask, because I'm sure there are so many out there. And it's just been a fascinating Chapter Connect. I'm also sure that as soon as this is over, as soon as COVID is not over, but manageable, I'm sure you're going to have a lot of company over there, because not only do people want to be there, you need the people, and we need you. So, in fact, Tim, you were just over in Africa recently. Do you want to explain what your experience was and how it relates to what everybody's talking about?
Yeah, Judy and I went to Tanzania to photograph the Great Migration of the wildebeest, and so we were in the Ngorongoro crater for a while. I was told that there are normally about 150 trucks in the crater on a given day. We had 3 trucks. There was one other tourist truck and one truck researching lion population. And that was it. 5 trucks in the entire crater the entire day. For the migration, I didn't see any other tourists. We were the only tourists there the entire time we were there. It's really devastating, the effect it's had on tourism.
Mm-hmm. Whoa.
I was just going to bring up to Lori. Lori, you were cutting edge in sustainability and technology, and you really have a self-sufficient market over there. You have your the people that work for you making cheese, and you have them farming, and you have your own power sources and water sources. How has this turn in tourism affected you? But at the same time, you're really, a forerunner in what has to become the rest of tourism.
Well, when we started out, obviously, as a research and conservation organization, tourism in Africa, obviously, is really, really important. And we knew that we couldn't just bank on tourism. And this was a prime example of COVID just closing down everywhere in the world. And Namibia has suffered like all the rest of Africa because of no tourism. We have 90% of our tourism dollars here are gone. And that is a rollover. So we do and have been able to keep our staffs going, dealing with our biomass and bush program. And that was called essential work because it was a fuel and energy source. But with that, if you look at the craft side of things, just with, we have a big crafts program, there's probably about, $70,000 to $80,000 that the crafts people just here in Namibia aren't getting from us for the tourism aspect. And I think about that and I feel pretty bad. We've tried hard to teach people a lot about sustainable livestock, good livestock management, wildlife management. And so the livestock, through an integrated system, I think plays a key role when we end up with these kinds of issues. But trying to diversify, I think, is really important. Our cheeses have been selling to the stores in the cities instead of people coming here to our center buying them. So we've had to be very creative in even we've got 800 liters a week of milk coming in. We've even learned how to dry our milk for using it in the future. So, trying to come up with these different alternatives, I think, is fascinating, and I love to hear what other people are doing as well. But we do need to market ourselves, come up with livelihood development, and then figure out that tourism is not the holy grail. It's not the only thing. We need to make sure that we are diversified as well.
I think that Praveen really made a point of how every aspect of this needs to work together, from the countries to the government to the people, the conservation to the animal efforts. It really needs to be a complete package in order for all of us to survive. And we're seeing a little dog walking behind you. Is that a cheetah or what is it, Lori?
That's one of our livestock guarding dogs, actually, although she's retired. And now she guards me, so.
It's always nice
Sorry,
to have
I don't have any cheetahs
you.
running around here.
So when you're talking about the dogs, I know that you've worked with Lally on the dogs. Lally, what's your feeling? You've always collaborated together in some way. I know, you have lions, you have cheetahs, but everybody needs to work together. And you have an elephant trench too, right? Lally? You're muted.
We might need to rephrase the question, because we work with Lori, but we don't work with the dogs, and we don't have an elephant trench.
You don't? Okay, I'm sorry. Let's cut that part out.
No worries.
Okay. Okay, who said elephant trench? Somebody said elephant trench in there.
But we
do work on
wildlife conflict.
Yeah,
you work on wildlife conflict. Okay, so let me go on that one. Okay, here we go. 1, 2, 3. Luis, we're ready. I know that Lally and Lori work together on many different aspects, but one of them specifically is wildlife conflict. Lally, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Thank you, Anne. Yeah, for us, human wildlife conflict, and I think Lori would agree, is often the powder keg. It's the first thing that sparks people off, because when you have a large carnivore like a lion or a cheetah, take your livestock, that's like someone coming in and raiding your bank account. And of course, it goes way beyond that. It's their cultural value to the livestock as well, and societal importance to them. So when people lose them, that's really critical. And so for us, the first step is always preventing conflict, and then building out a holistic conservation model from that. Really working with local people to derive the strategies for preventing conflict. They know what works best. They know how to care for their livestock. And if we can help develop and co-implement programs together, I think that's really absolutely key today in today's conservation, is that we're working hand in hand to engage with communities who often have very strong conservation and environmental ideas and objectives. If we listen to those, we develop very strong and sustainable programming. And that's what we've been doing at African People and Wildlife. And I believe it's what Gladys does and Lori do, and many of the other presenters today.
I'm also hearing, a common thread with what you're doing for women, whether it's Ride for a Woman or Women Enterprise Center. There's something very specific about empowering women, giving them the ability to be sustainable, to take care of their own families, and making a living from whether it's honey or cheeses. And Ian, I'm understanding from you that, Ian, you're muted, but your coffee production as well includes all different types of people, so that they can be empowered and create their own livelihood. Is that correct?
Yeah, very much. We want to influence the national picture of coffee, but we want to also provide better livelihoods for basically the peasants, the small farmers around us. Uganda is particularly rural in that at least more than 80% of people live off the land. And what I've seen since I got involved in the agricultural field is that it's often very poor agronomy. So if we're able to improve the agronomy, we improve their outputs, we improve household incomes. And also, because we're on the edge of a natural forest, I'd like to do some ecotourism and have people involved in that as well, because it's a beautiful farm. When you see the video, you'll appreciate how beautiful it's in the west of Uganda, how beautiful Uganda can be.
Do you foresee a problem with climate change in the coffee crop where you are?
As I said earlier, the Robusta coffee is more resistant to climate change in terms of drier climates than is the Arabica, and therefore it's really it's a more hardy crop. It has less problem with fungal infections and so on and so forth. So it's a good crop to use when one's thinking of climate change.
And, we heard from Vance earlier about all the work that he's doing and how they're helping so many people out all over the continent, not just in South Africa. And I think we're all grateful to our members from the Explorers Club for putting in the time, the effort, the blood, the sweat, and everything that you're doing to enrich the people of Africa. And we can't say enough but to say thank you to all of you for helping and doing something really crucial to keep the continent alive. And Tim, again, you were just over there, the incredible work that these people are doing. Could you even imagine? It's just amazing.
Yeah, it's hard I'm sure, for everyone to carry on in this environment. I mean, we're all going a little stir crazy. I don't care if you're out if you're in the cities or if you're out in the wild. Everybody seems to be very heavily impacted. The camps I was staying at in Tanzania, the people working there, it was a skeleton crew, and they hadn't been home to see their families in months.
Also, Ian is also a medical doctor. What kind of physician are you, Ian?
Oh, very good physician. I'm a public health physician, actually, but I've been a general physician, all my life. And certainly we're seeing a big surge of COVID at the minute. We're seeing a very big surge of COVID right now. So Uganda's very high numbers. We're seeing several thousand cases per day. Fortunately, Uganda's got a young population, so the mortality is not as high. Our average age here is 15, whereas the average age in the United Kingdom is 47. Yeah. We are seeing death, not on the scale of Western countries.
It's hard for us to fathom, the average age is 15. Wow, incredible. But I just want to thank all of you. I want to thank Gladys for putting everything together, Lori, Praveen, Lally, Vance, and of course, Ian. You've made this such a very special and unique Chapter Connect for all of us. Again, we will ask you to put your contact information so that our audience can ask you questions directly. Due to the time change, it was difficult to pull this off. But I have no doubt that this is going to be one of the most special Chapter Connects of all, and a perfect way to end a very difficult year for everyone.
Well, I want to thank all of our presenters today for their incredible presentations. And we're going to be heading into the holiday season now. And I guess the next Chapter Connect will probably begin in January once again. Is that correct, Anne?
Absolutely. But before that, we have a holiday bash coming up next Monday night instead of the lecture. And we hope that everybody will be able to join us from all over the world.
Yes.
But again, thank you to Gladys and thank you to all of you for presenting today. And we wish you well. And we can't thank you enough for all the incredible work that you're doing. So we hope to see you soon. Bye, everybody.
Yes. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye.
Stay safe and healthy.
Okay.